A chance encounter. Rebecca Collins stood in the cozy warmth of her kitchen, the aroma of freshly baked cookies wafting through the air. The sight of colorful wrapping paper, scissors, and ribbon spread across the table reminded her of the tradition she had cherished with her late husband, Michael. Together, they had started visiting the local orphanage every year during the holiday season, bringing gifts, laughter, and a touch of magic to the children's lives. Even though Michael had passed away 2 years ago, Rebecca couldn't let the tradition fade. It was her way of keeping his memory alive. She carefully tied a red ribbon around the last box and leaned back, her hands brushing against the soft wool of the sweater she wore. It was Michael's favorite on her, a deep burgundy shade that he always said brought out the sparkle in her eyes. Her gaze wandered to the small photo tucked into the corner of the counter, a candid shot of Michael laughing during their last Christmas together. A pang of longing hit her chest, but she shook her head, refusing to let grief steal the joy of the day. After loading the neatly wrapped gifts into the car, Rebecca drove through the bustling streets of the city. Snowflakes began to fall gently, dotting the windshield as cheerful holiday lights twinkled along the sidewalks. The orphanage was nestled at the edge of the city, its brick facade adorned with garlands and wreaths. As she pulled into the parking lot, a sense of anticipation filled her. This place, with its laughter and chaos, always felt like a refuge from the quiet loneliness of her home. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Children of all ages ran around, their faces lighting up as volunteers handed out gifts and snacks. Rebecca greeted Mrs. Coleman, the kind-hearted director of the orphanage, with a warm hug. "Rebecca, it's so good to see you again," Mrs. Coleman said, her eyes crinkling with delight. "The kids have been looking forward to this all week." Rebecca smiled. "It's my favorite time of the year. Let me know if you need help with anything." As Rebecca moved through the room, handing out gifts and chatting with the children, her heart felt lighter. The room buzzed with laughter and chatter, but then, as if guided by an invisible thread, her eyes fell on a quiet figure in the corner. A boy, no older than 8, sat cross-legged on the floor, engrossed in a tattered comic book. His features were striking, deep brown eyes, high cheekbones, and a gentle expression that seemed out of place amidst the lively chaos around him. Her breath caught in her throat. The resemblance was undeniable. The boy looked exactly like Michael. Rebecca froze, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the edge of the gift bag she was holding. She blinked, convinced her mind was playing tricks on her, but when she looked again, the boy was still there, his small frame leaning forward as he flipped a page. "Are you all right, Rebecca?" Mrs. Coleman's voice brought her back to the present. Rebecca turned quickly, struggling to compose herself. "Yes, I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. Who is that boy over there?" Mrs. Coleman glanced over her shoulder. "Oh, that's Elijah. Sweet kid. He's been here for about a year now." Rebecca's heart pounded. She couldn't tear her gaze away from him. "Do you know anything about him? His family?" Mrs. Coleman sighed, her expression softening. "Not much. He was found abandoned at a park one evening. Poor thing had no identification, no belongings, nothing. The authorities tried to track down his family, but no one ever came forward. He's been with us ever since." Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. "That's so sad. He must miss his family." Mrs. Coleman nodded. "He doesn't talk about them much, but he's a resilient little boy. Very bright, always drawing or reading. He has a quiet strength about him." Rebecca's mind raced as she watched Elijah turn another page of his comic book, his small fingers tracing the illustrations. The resemblance to Michael wasn't just in his features, it was in his demeanor, his quiet focus. Memories of Michael's love for comic books flooded her mind. He used to spend hours reading them, often sharing his favorites with her and explaining the intricate details of the stories. She hesitated for a moment before approaching Elijah. Her hands felt clammy, and her heart thudded in her chest as she crouched down to his level. "Hi there," she said softly. Elijah looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of curiosity in his gaze, but he didn't speak. "I'm Rebecca," she continued. "What are you reading?" He held up the comic book, the corners of his mouth lifting in a shy smile. "It's about superheroes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I like the ones who help people." Rebecca felt her heart clench. "Superheroes are the best, aren't they? My husband used to love them too." Elijah tilted his head, studying her for a moment. "Did he have a favorite?" Rebecca smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He loved all of them, but he said the best heroes were the ones who didn't need capes to make a difference." Elijah nodded solemnly, as if he understood. "That's true." Rebecca sat back on her heels, her mind swirling with questions. Who was this boy? How could he look so much like Michael? And why did she feel an inexplicable pull toward him? As the evening wore on, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that meeting Elijah was more than a coincidence. Something about him felt familiar, as though he was connected to her in a way she couldn't yet explain. But for now, all she could do was smile as she watched him laugh with the other children, a small ember of hope igniting in her heart. This was only the beginning. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change forever. Unanswered questions. Rebecca drove home in a daze, her thoughts consumed by Elijah. The icy wind howled outside as snowflakes danced in the glow of streetlights, but she barely noticed. The resemblance between the boy and Michael was seared into her mind. It was impossible, absurd, even, but undeniable. His eyes, his smile, even the thoughtful tilt of his head when he spoke, all echoed Michael's essence. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, a strange mixture of longing and curiosity gnawing at her. The logical part of her brain tried to reason it away. "It's just a coincidence," she told herself. But her heart whispered otherwise. When she arrived home, the house greeted her with its familiar silence. The fireplace crackled softly, and the scent of pine lingered in the air from the Christmas tree she had decorated alone. Rebecca set her coat and keys on the entryway table, her eyes drifting to the framed photograph of Michael on the mantel. His warm, confident smile seemed to radiate through the room. She sank onto the couch, her gaze fixed on the photograph. "Michael," she whispered, "who was that boy? And why does he look so much like you?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The search for clues. The next morning, Rebecca woke up with a renewed sense of determination. She couldn't let this go unanswered. There had to be an explanation. Over coffee, she made a list in her notebook. Speak with Mrs. Coleman again. Look through Michael's old belongings. Contact David, Michael's best friend. Rebecca spent the morning rummaging through the attic, pulling out dusty boxes labeled with Michael's neat handwriting. Most of them contained memorabilia from their travels, old tax forms, and letters. But as she sifted through the papers, nothing unusual stood out. Then she found it, a small leather journal tucked beneath a stack of documents. Michael had always loved to jot down thoughts and ideas, but he rarely shared them. Her fingers trembled as she opened the worn cover. The pages were filled with sketches, notes about comic book ideas, and musings about life. One entry caught her attention. Sometimes I wonder if the choices we make in the past find a way to echo into the future. Secrets are heavy burdens, but some are kept out of love. Rebecca's brow furrowed. Secrets? What secrets? Michael had always been open and honest with her, or so she thought. A conversation with Mrs. Coleman. Later that afternoon, Rebecca returned to the orphanage. The children were playing in the snow outside, their laughter echoing through the crisp air. Inside, the warmth of the building enveloped her as she found Mrs. Coleman in her office. "Rebecca, what a surprise," Mrs. Coleman said, gesturing for her to sit. "Did you forget something yesterday?" Rebecca hesitated, unsure how to phrase her questions without sounding strange. "Actually, I wanted to ask more about Elijah. He's such a remarkable boy." Mrs. Coleman's face softened. "He really is. We're hoping he finds a forever home soon. Do you know anything else about his background? His mother, perhaps?" Mrs. Coleman's expression grew somber. "Not much, unfortunately. He was found alone near Meadowbrook Park about a year ago. Social services tried to locate his family, but there were no leads. His mother never returned for him." Rebecca's heart ached for Elijah. "Did he say anything about his father?" Mrs. Coleman shook her head. "Only that his mother told him his father was a good man, but that's all he remembers." Rebecca's chest tightened. The pieces didn't fit, but the more she learned, the more determined she became to find answers. A visit to David. That evening, Rebecca met David at a quiet cafe downtown. The place was cozy, with wooden beams and flickering candles on the tables. David, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, greeted her with a warm hug. "It's been too long," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "How've you been holding up?" "Good days and bad days," Rebecca admitted. "But I need to talk to you about something unusual." David raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" Rebecca took a deep breath and showed him the photograph she had taken of Elijah. David's eyes widened in shock. "Rebecca, this kid, he looks just like Michael." "I know," she said, her voice shaky. "And I don't understand how that's possible." David stared at the photo, his brow furrowing. "Michael never mentioned having another child. He would have told me. We were practically brothers. That's what I thought too. But now I'm not so sure. There was this journal entry I found. He wrote something about secrets being heavy burdens." David leaned forward, his voice low. "Are you saying you think Michael had a child with someone else?" "I don't know what to think," Rebecca admitted. "But I need to find out the truth. The weight of possibility." That night, Rebecca lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed every moment she had shared with Michael, searching for clues she might have missed. Had there been signs? Hints of a past he had kept hidden? The thought unsettled her, but she couldn't ignore the possibility. Elijah wasn't just any boy, he was a mystery tied to Michael's life, and perhaps even her own. Rebecca made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth, no matter where it led. Because in her heart, she knew that Elijah was more than just a coincidence. He was a connection to Michael that she had never expected but couldn't walk away from. And somehow, she felt that this journey would change everything. A journey into the past. The next morning, Rebecca woke up to the soft glow of winter sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. Her restless sleep had been filled with fragmented dreams of Michael and Elijah, blending memories with unanswered questions. As she pulled herself from bed, a strange resolve settled over her. Today, she would confront the mysteries that lingered in the shadows of her late husband's past. After a quick breakfast, she retrieved the old leather journal from Michael's belongings and flipped through its pages again. There were sketches of superheroes, musings about life, and scattered lists of ideas for their next vacation, plans they never got to fulfill. But one entry stood out among the others. "I've made mistakes, but love has a way of forgiving even the things we can't admit out loud." Rebecca traced the faded ink with her fingertips. What mistakes had Michael been referring to? And why hadn't he shared them with her? She knew there was only one place that might hold the answers, Meadowbrook Park, the place where Elijah had been found a year ago. The park and a forgotten trail. Rebecca parked her car near the entrance to Meadowbrook Park. The familiar landscape stretched before her, covered in a pristine layer of snow. Families strolled along the paths, their laughter mingling with the rustle of winter wind. She wrapped her coat tightly around herself and followed the main trail, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Memories of walks with Michael here flooded back, the way he'd always stop to point out the smallest details, like the intricate patterns of frost on leaves or the bright red flash of a cardinal against bare branches. Near the edge of the park, she found the spot Mrs. Coleman had described, a secluded bench beneath a towering oak tree. The area was quiet, away from the main paths, and surrounded by dense shrubbery. Rebecca stood there, imagining the scene a year ago, a frightened little boy, abandoned and alone in the cold. Her heart ached at the thought. Why here? Why this place? As she turned to leave, something caught her eye, a weathered wooden sign partially hidden by overgrown branches. It pointed toward a narrow, forgotten trail. Curiosity tugged at her, and she decided to follow it. The path wound through the trees, each step muffled by the snow. After several minutes, she reached a small clearing with a dilapidated cabin nestled among the pines. The roof sagged under the weight of snow, and ivy crept up the weathered walls. Rebecca's breath hitched. She had never seen this place before, but there was something oddly familiar about it. A connection to the past. Pushing open the creaky door, Rebecca stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the pale light streaming through broken windows. The air was thick with the scent of age and neglect. She moved cautiously through the space, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floorboards. There was a simple table, a few chairs, and a stone fireplace filled with ash. On the wall, a faded photograph hung crookedly. Rebecca's heart stopped. It was Michael. The photograph showed him standing beside a woman with warm brown eyes and a radiant smile. In her arms was a baby with familiar dark eyes and curly hair. Rebecca's mind reeled. Who was this woman? And was the child in her arms Elijah? Her hands trembled as she took the photograph off the wall, turning it over. Scrawled on the back were the words. For Michael, love always, Carla. Carla. The name rang a distant bell. Michael had mentioned a Carla once, a college girlfriend he had dated long before they met. But he had never spoken of her again, nor had he ever hinted at having a child. Rebecca's chest tightened with a mix of shock and betrayal. Had Michael known about Elijah? Had he kept this part of his life hidden from her all these years? Piecing it together. Back at home, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, the photograph resting in front of her. She couldn't take her eyes off Michael's face, his joyful expression, so full of life. She picked up her phone and searched online for any information about Carla. It didn't take long to find an obituary from a year ago. Carla Jackson, beloved mother and artist, had passed away after a long battle with illness. Rebecca's heart ached at the thought of Elijah losing his mother. But one detail in the obituary stood out, survived by her son, Elijah Jackson. There it was, confirmation that Elijah was indeed Carla's child. But was he Michael's son too? The resemblance suggested it, but Rebecca needed proof. She knew there was only one person who might have the answers, Carla's sister, Lillian, whose name was listed in the obituary. The call. Rebecca took a deep breath and dialed the number she found online. The phone rang several times before a warm voice answered. Hello? Hi, is this Lillian Jackson? Yes, who's this? My name is Rebecca Collins. I was married to Michael Collins, and I believe you might know something about his connection to Carla. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Michael Collins, yes, I remember him. He and Carla were close once. Why are you asking about this now? Rebecca's voice wavered. I met a boy named Elijah at the orphanage. He looks exactly like Michael. I need to know the truth. Lillian sighed. Carla never wanted to burden anyone with the truth, especially not Michael. But yes. Elijah is his son. Carla always told him his father was a good man, even if circumstances kept them apart. Tears welled up in Rebecca's eyes. Michael never knew, did he? No, Lillian confirmed gently. He didn't. Carla made that choice, thinking it was for the best. But I always wondered if it was the right decision. Rebecca's heart ached with a mix of sorrow and relief. Michael hadn't kept a secret from her after all, he had simply never known. A new purpose. As she ended the call, Rebecca felt a renewed sense of purpose. Elijah was Michael's son, a living connection to the man she had loved deeply. And now, he was alone in the world, waiting for someone to give him the love and stability he deserved. Rebecca knew what she had to do. This journey into the past had given her answers, but it also opened a door to a new future, one where Elijah might finally have the family he had been longing for. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was the family Rebecca had been searching for too. The heart's decision. Rebecca sat by the window, watching as the first signs of dusk crept across the winter sky. The photograph of Michael, Carla, and baby Elijah rested on the table in front of her, its edges worn from years of handling. Her heart still raced from the revelations of the day. Michael had a son, Elijah was his son. It was both shocking and bittersweet. She had loved Michael with every fiber of her being, and knowing a part of him still lived on filled her with a strange mixture of joy and sorrow. But one thing was clear, Elijah was now a part of her story, too. As the weight of the truth settled over her, Rebecca knew she couldn't walk away from the boy who was a living echo of the man she had loved. She picked up her phone and dialed the orphanage. Mrs. Coleman answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Coleman, it's Rebecca," she said, her voice steady. "Oh, Rebecca. Is everything all right?" "I'd like to meet with Elijah again," Rebecca said firmly. "I need to talk to him. It's important." Mrs. Coleman hesitated. "Of course, but, may I ask why?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "It's complicated, but I believe I might have a connection to him. I just need to spend more time with him." Mrs. Coleman's voice softened. "I understand. Come by tomorrow afternoon. I'll make the arrangements." Meeting Elijah again. The next day, Rebecca returned to the orphanage with a nervous energy buzzing through her. The children were playing outside, bundled in colorful coats and scarves, their laughter echoing through the crisp winter air. Elijah stood apart from the others, building a snowman with meticulous care. His brow furrowed in concentration as he shaped the snow into smooth curves. Rebecca smiled at his determination, it reminded her so much of Michael. "Elijah," she called gently. He looked up, his face brightening when he saw her. "Hi, Miss Rebecca. Mind if I help?" she asked, kneeling beside him. "Sure," he said with a grin. "But you have to make the best snowballs. No lumpy ones." Rebecca laughed. "Deal." They worked side by side, the tension in her chest easing with every laugh and playful exchange. Elijah's joy was infectious, and for a moment, the weight of the past faded into the background. When the snowman was complete, Elijah stood back proudly. "We did good, huh?" "We did great," Rebecca agreed. They sat on a nearby bench, the cold air nipping at their cheeks. Rebecca's heart raced as she considered how to approach the subject. "Elijah," she began carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you remember much about your dad?" Elijah's expression grew thoughtful. "Not really. Mom used to say he was a good man, but I never met him. She showed me a picture once, though." Rebecca's breath caught. "Do you remember what he looked like?" "Kind of. He had a big smile, and Mom said I got his eyes." Elijah looked up at her, his gaze steady. "Why do you ask?" Rebecca swallowed hard. "I think I knew your dad. And I think he would have been really proud of you." Elijah's eyes widened. You knew him? Really? Yes, she said softly. He was someone very special to me. Elijah's face lit up with curiosity. Tell me about him. Rebecca smiled, tears pricking her eyes. He was kind, brave, and always saw the best in people. And you remind me of him so much. A new bond forms. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca visited Elijah regularly. They built puzzles, read books, and shared stories by the orphanage's fireplace. With each visit, their bond grew stronger. Elijah's laughter filled the spaces in Rebecca's heart that had felt empty for so long. But as much as she cherished their time together, a nagging question lingered in her mind: could she truly take on the responsibility of being a mother to Elijah? One evening, as she sat by the fire in her living room, she called David. Rebecca, he said warmly, how are you holding up? Better, she admitted. But I need your advice. Of course. What's going on? She told him everything, the discovery of Elijah, the photograph, and the growing bond she shared with the boy. David, I'm scared, she confessed. What if I'm not enough for him? What if I can't fill the void left by losing his mother? David's voice was gentle. Rebecca, you've always had a heart big enough to hold the people you love. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to show up for him. That's what love is about. Rebecca wiped away a tear. Do you really think I can do this? I know you can, David said firmly. And Michael would have wanted you to. Taking the leap. The following week, Rebecca met with Mrs. Coleman in her office. The older woman's eyes sparkled with warmth as Rebecca explained her intentions. I want to adopt Elijah, Rebecca said, her voice steady. Mrs. Coleman's smile widened. I was hoping you'd say that. He's taken quite a shine to you. I've taken a shine to him too, Rebecca admitted. He's an incredible kid. There will be paperwork and legal steps, of course, Mrs. Coleman said. But I'll help you through it. Thank you, Rebecca said, gratitude welling up inside her. As she left the office, a sense of peace washed over her. She was taking a leap of faith, guided by love and the memory of Michael. Sharing the news. Later that afternoon, Rebecca found Elijah in the playroom, building a tower of blocks. Elijah, she said gently, can we talk for a minute? He looked up, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Sure. She knelt beside him, her heart pounding. How would you feel about coming to live with me? For good? Elijah's eyes widened. Really? You mean like a real family? Yes, she said, her voice thick with emotion. If that's what you want. Elijah launched himself into her arms, hugging her tightly. I'd love that, he whispered. Rebecca held him close, tears streaming down her face. Me too, Elijah. Me too. As they sat there, wrapped in each other's embrace, Rebecca felt the weight of the past lift. Michael was gone, but his legacy lived on in Elijah. And together, they would build a future filled with love, hope, and new beginnings. Building a new life. The morning air was crisp and filled with the scent of fresh pine as Rebecca stood in front of the courthouse steps, Elijah's hand tightly clasped in hers. Today was the day that would mark the beginning of their new life together. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings with social workers, and home visits. Through it all, Rebecca's determination had never wavered. Elijah had been remarkably patient for a child his age, always asking questions about what the meetings meant and whether it was really true that they could be a family. Now, as they stood together, waiting to finalize the adoption, Rebecca felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Elijah looked up at her, his dark eyes wide with wonder. Are you nervous? He asked. A little, she admitted with a smile. But mostly happy. How about you? He grinned. Happy. Really happy. Rebecca squeezed his hand. Me too. A moment that changes everything. The courtroom was surprisingly warm, with polished wood paneling and sunlight streaming through tall windows. The judge, a kind-looking woman with silver-streaked hair, smiled as Rebecca and Elijah approached. Rebecca's heart raced as the judge began the proceedings, asking questions about her intentions and ability to care for Elijah. Her voice was steady as she spoke of the bond they had formed and her unwavering commitment to being the mother he deserved. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Elijah, do you have anything you'd like to say? Elijah glanced at Rebecca, then back at the judge. I just want to say thank you. For letting me have a family again. Rebecca's throat tightened with emotion. The judge's expression softened. Well, I believe it's clear that you both belong together, she said warmly. Congratulations, Rebecca. The adoption is officially granted. The gavel struck the wood, sealing their fate. Elijah beamed, and Rebecca pulled him into a tight embrace, tears streaming down her face. We did it, she whispered. We're a family now, Elijah said proudly. Settling into home life. Back at home, the house felt warmer, brighter. Rebecca had made sure Elijah's room was exactly how he wanted it, painted in vibrant blue with shelves filled with books and a cozy corner for his art supplies. Their days quickly fell into a joyful rhythm. Mornings were filled with laughter over breakfast as Elijah attempted to master pancake flipping. Afternoons were spent at the park, where they played catch and built snow forts. Evenings were reserved for reading by the fireplace, Elijah curled up beside Rebecca as she read aloud from his favorite adventure stories. One chilly Saturday afternoon, Rebecca decided to introduce Elijah to one of Michael's traditions, woodworking. Come on, she said, leading him to the garage where Michael's old workbench still stood, dusted but sturdy. What are we gonna do? Elijah asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. We're going to build something together, Rebecca said, pulling out a set of simple tools. Michael, your dad, loved working with wood. He used to say there's nothing more satisfying than creating something with your own hands. Elijah's face lit up. Cool. Can we build a birdhouse? Absolutely, Rebecca said with a grin. They spent the afternoon measuring, sawing, and hammering. Elijah was a quick learner, and his enthusiasm was infectious. By the time they finished, they had a sturdy birdhouse painted in bright colors. As they hung it on a tree branch in the backyard, Elijah beamed with pride. Do you think Dad would have liked it? Rebecca's heart swelled. He would have loved it. A visit to the cemetery. A few weeks later, Rebecca decided it was time to visit Michael's grave. She wanted Elijah to feel connected to the man who had unknowingly shaped his life. They walked through the cemetery, the snow crunching under their feet. Rebecca carried a bouquet of winter flowers, their vibrant colors a contrast to the gray landscape. When they reached Michael's headstone, Rebecca knelt down and placed the flowers gently at its base. Hi, Michael, she said softly. We have someone here who wants to meet you. Elijah stepped forward, his expression solemn. Hi, Dad, he said quietly. I didn't get to know you, but I know you were a good person. Miss Rebecca told me all about you. I promise I'll make you proud. Tears filled Rebecca's eyes as she wrapped an arm around Elijah's shoulders. We both will, she whispered. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a sense of peace. Facing challenges together. Life wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when Elijah's grief over losing his mother resurfaced, and Rebecca had to navigate the delicate balance of comforting him without overwhelming him. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at school, Elijah sat silently at the dinner table, pushing his food around his plate. Want to talk about it? Rebecca asked gently. He shrugged. Just miss Mom sometimes. Rebecca reached across the table and took his hand. I know. And it's okay to miss her. You can talk to me anytime, Elijah. I'm here for you. Elijah's eyes filled with tears. Thanks, Miss Rebecca. You don't have to call me Miss Rebecca, you know, she said with a soft smile. Just Rebecca is fine. Or, whatever feels right to you. He hesitated, then said shyly, Can I call you Mom? Rebecca's breath caught. I'd love that, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Elijah smiled, and for the first time that evening, the sadness lifted from his face. A future full of possibilities. As winter gave way to spring, their bond continued to grow. Elijah flourished, his laughter filling the house with joy. Rebecca felt a renewed sense of purpose, her heart fuller than it had been in years. One sunny afternoon, they stood in the backyard, watching birds flutter around the birdhouse they had built together. Look at that, Elijah said proudly. They love it. They sure do, Rebecca agreed. Elijah turned to her, his expression thoughtful. Do you think Dad's watching us? Rebecca smiled. I think he is. And I think he's really proud of you. Elijah grinned. I hope so. Rebecca wrapped an arm around his shoulders. He is. And so am I. As they stood together, basking in the warmth of the sun, Rebecca knew that their journey was just beginning. Together, they would face whatever life brought their way, bound by love, resilience, and the memory of a man who had left a lasting legacy. A legacy of love. The scent of fresh flowers filled the room as Rebecca arranged a bouquet of daisies and lilies on the kitchen table. Spring had fully bloomed, bringing with it a sense of renewal and hope. The past few months had been transformative for both her and Elijah, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Elijah bounded down the stairs, his sneakers squeaking against the polished wood floor. His backpack was slung over one shoulder, and his face was alight with excitement. Ready for the big day? Rebecca asked with a smile. Yep. The science fair's gonna be awesome, he said enthusiastically. I can't wait to show everyone the solar-powered car we built. Rebecca chuckled. You mean the one you built? I just handed you the screwdriver. You helped a lot, Elijah insisted. Well, I'm proud of you, kiddo. Let's make sure we get there early to set up. As they walked to the car, Elijah glanced up at her. Do you think Dad would have liked the project? Rebecca's heart warmed. Absolutely. He would have been fascinated by your creativity and determination. Just like I am. Elijah beamed, his confidence shining through. A day to remember. The school gymnasium buzzed with energy as students showcased their science projects. Colorful posters and inventive models lined the tables, and proud parents mingled, snapping photos and offering words of encouragement. Elijah's project was front and center, a sleek, miniature solar-powered car that gleamed under the gym lights. He had meticulously designed every detail, from the aerodynamic shape to the solar panels that powered its tiny wheels. As judges made their rounds, Rebecca stood by Elijah's side, watching with pride as he explained the mechanics of his creation. His passion was evident, and it was clear that he had captured the judges' attention. When the winners were announced, Elijah's name echoed through the gym. First place goes to Elijah Thompson for his innovative solar-powered car. The crowd erupted into applause, and Rebecca's heart swelled with joy. Elijah's face lit up as he accepted his trophy, his smile wide and triumphant. You did it. Rebecca said, hugging him tightly. We did it, he corrected with a grin. A special celebration. That evening, Rebecca and Elijah celebrated with pizza and ice cream at their favorite diner. The trophy sat proudly on the table between them. You know, Elijah said between bites of pepperoni pizza, this is the best day ever. I'd have to agree, Rebecca said, raising her glass of soda in a toast. To many more best days. Elijah clinked his glass against hers. And to us. Rebecca's eyes glistened with emotion. To us. Unexpected visitors. The following week, as Rebecca was tending to her garden, a familiar voice called out from the driveway. Rebecca. She looked up to see David waving as he stepped out of his car. His presence was always a welcome sight. David. What a surprise, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by. How are you and Elijah doing? We're doing great. Come in, I'll make us some coffee. As they sat on the porch, sipping coffee, Rebecca shared stories about Elijah's recent achievements and the joy he had brought into her life. He sounds like an incredible kid, David said warmly. He is, Rebecca agreed. I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again, but Elijah has changed everything. David smiled. Michael would be proud. And I know you're making a difference in that boy's life. A family tradition continues. One sunny afternoon, Elijah and Rebecca decided to tackle a new woodworking project, a memory box to hold photos, letters, and keepsakes. They measured and cut the wood together, the rhythmic sound of the saw filling the garage. Elijah's confidence with the tools had grown, and he took the lead, guiding Rebecca through the steps. As they sanded the edges smooth, Elijah looked up thoughtfully. Can we put something of Dad's in here? He asked. Rebecca's heart softened. I think that's a wonderful idea. I have a few things we can add, like the letters he wrote me and some pictures. Elijah nodded. And maybe the picture of all of us at the science fair. Because that was one of the best days ever. Rebecca smiled. I love that idea. They painted the box a deep, rich blue, the color of Michael's favorite sweater, and carefully placed their treasures inside. As they stood back to admire their work, Elijah grinned. We make a pretty good team, huh? The best, Rebecca agreed. Looking toward the future. As summer approached, Rebecca and Elijah found themselves planning new adventures. There were trips to the beach, hikes through the woods, and nights spent stargazing in the backyard. One evening, as they lay on a blanket under the vast expanse of stars, Elijah spoke quietly. Mom? Rebecca's heart skipped a beat at the word. Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Dad is happy up there? He asked, his voice filled with wonder. Rebecca wrapped an arm around him. I think he's very happy. And I think he's watching over us, cheering us on every step of the way. Elijah smiled. I like that. They lay in comfortable silence, the cool night air wrapping around them like a gentle embrace. A legacy of love. As Rebecca reflected on their journey, she knew that life would always have its challenges. But with Elijah by her side, she felt stronger than ever. Together, they had built something beautiful, a family rooted in love, resilience, and the memory of a man who had left an indelible mark on their lives. Michael's legacy lived on, not just in the keepsakes they cherished, but in the love that filled their hearts and guided their future. Rebecca pressed a kiss to Elijah's forehead. I'm so proud of you, Elijah. And I love you more than words can say. I love you too, Mom, he whispered. As the stars shimmered above them, Rebecca knew that their story was far from over. It was a story of new beginnings, unbreakable bonds, and a love that would endure for generations to come.